And greetings, friends around the world and throughout the universe. Whenever and wherever you may be, this is Bobby D. Moore speaking. This time we take a bittersweet walk into the past, when the juices of youth flowed freely and everything seemed possible. This little story is true and personal and painful. The year was 1950. We had no reliable source of water on the place, and so we had to haul it from a creek several miles away. My mother cut a metal oil drum half in two with a hammer and chisel, and the two big pots which resulted were the watering troughs for the animals. The water was transported in another barrel in the trunk compartment of my mother's old '39 Chevrolet. The arrangement worked out pretty good as long as we could manage to keep enough money ahead to buy gasoline. I think we must have been paying about 20 or 25 cents a gallon back then. Jack Creek, as we knew it, was crystal clear and swift, flowing with a clean gravel bottom and surrounded by willows whose bending limbs caressed the flowing stream. A dirt road which dead-ended at the creek had been forced through the trees, and this is where we backed up to the stream and dipped the clear, cold water out with buckets. A trip to the creek was a happy time for me. I'd usually wind up wading if the weather was warm enough, and I'd catch tiny black catfish which swam in the calm shallows like little whales. The creek was fed by springs, which erupted near the eastern base of nearby Horton Mountain. Horton Mountain was not a mountain by anyone's standards, but it was an abrupt uplift of several hundred feet, produced by a deep salt dome which, through the millennia, had been slowly inching its way toward the surface, displacing all above it. The geology of the place fascinated me. The creek fascinated me, as did a nearby artesian well which flowed continuously under the willows and emptied itself into the greater stream. It was as if the scene had been created just for me. Being there was a wonderful adventure, especially when the big black fire-breathing steam locomotive would come roaring across the creosote timbered bridge which crossed the creek at the exact same spot where we gathered our water supply. More than once my mother and I stood under the bridge as the train thundered a scant few feet above our heads. The screaming whistle, the pounding drivers, every molecule in our bodies was vibrating. And some people wonder what I used to do for kicks. Well, the bridge and the creek developed a kind of spiritual connotation for me as the years passed. And even when we didn't have to haul water anymore, I'd go back and sit alone in the quietness and listen to the music of the stream, and I'd wait for the sound of the approaching train. More than a decade later, I found myself taking a beautiful young woman, who had been my early high school sweetheart, out to lunch at the bridge. Marilyn had left White House before the final year of high school, but after school ended, she had come back to work part-time for a young married doctor who had recently begun a practice there. It was during her lunch hour from her job as doctor's assistant that we were together. I don't know, the total number of times was not more than 3, and as far as I can remember, I always had her back on time. Now, what I'm going to say will be hard for some of you to believe, but innocent kissing was as far as we ever went. I never considered anything more, and Marilyn was nearly as straight-laced as I. She was about as safe with me as can be imagined. Too safe, I think. The meetings were not clandestine as far as I was concerned, and I assumed that her parents knew we were having lunch together. But that apparently was not the case, or in any event, her father got the idea that his daughter's honor was in jeopardy, and I soon received a note from her telling me that she couldn't see me anymore. I still have it. Well, I'll save my comments regarding the father for a future program. You know, it is sad that wicked people project their wickedness onto the actions of innocents. But they do. It's standard human practice. The rumor was later circulated that the fine young doctor was having an affair with his assistant. Well, I don't think her name was ever mentioned directly in the gossip, however, certainly not to me anyway. I never returned to the bridge on Jack Creek, but I have seen her upturned face as she was that last day 1,000 times in my dreams. In the many decades which have passed since that time, a lot has changed. The little country town has grown larger, and the railroad has fallen into disrepair. The cross ties have rotted, and several miles of track have been totally removed. Dead tree trunks lie across the once shiny rails, and trees have grown up in the right-of-way. The ground no longer shakes with the rolling thunder of America's might. It's all symptomatic of the great curse which has fallen across our land, a curse in which values are inverted and beauty is destroyed for the sake of false progress. The steam locomotive has been displaced by the diesel electric, and the few honest men who ever were have been replaced by politicians, lawyers, carpetbaggers, profiteers, and opportunists. Today's world is not the same as the world of the 50s. Memories of the bridge have haunted me since it was a part of my life so very long ago. And finally, out of curiosity or compulsion, I decided to return there. The distance from Alberta Switch, near our old home place, to the south end of the line at Troop, Texas, is about 15 miles. The line was originally part of the INGN, that is, the Illinois and Great Northern Railroad. The first spikes were driven about a century ago, and the line extended all the way from Troop to Mineola. Now its northernmost extension ends at Tyler Pipe and Foundry in Swan, Texas. I plan to make it a walking trip, beginning at Troop and winding up at Alberta Switch. And so it began on a cool April morning, if I remember correctly. I was traveling light with a camera, 2 liters of water and a plastic Dr. Pepper bottle, and an extra pair of hand-me-down boots that were too tight. I left Troop about 8:30 and headed north down the densely overgrown right-of-way. I soon discovered that enterprising property owners had fenced across the right-of-way, and I was facing no trespass signs. You either climb over the fences or turn around and go back. Well, I decided to climb. A few miles north of Troop, I encountered an unexpected problem. The numerous bridges which had been built to cross the Mud Creek bottom had been completely removed. Only stubs of the creosote pilings protruded from the turbid water. This meant that I had to walk through the Mud Creek bottom swamp, sometimes up to my waist in water and mud. I knew there were water moccasins, and I knew that the rest of the trip was bound to be unpleasant, considering my wet and muddy clothing and the miles that lay ahead, and I was right. During the entire trip, I did not encounter another traveler, human that is. I met deer along the way, and observed several beaver communities, and was myself observed by hawks and vultures soaring overhead. The beavers seemed oblivious to the changes that had taken place around them. They paddled like little boats in the placid calm of surprisingly clear eddies. I walked through White House, covered with mud, and feeling unwelcome in a place where I had spent 12 happy years as a student. Nothing was the same. I was an alien in my own land. Finally, I came to the bridge over Jack Creek. Exhausted, I lay down on the bridge timbers to regain my strength. I peered at the dry gravel creek bed under the bridge. Where was the clear and flowing stream? Where was the artesian well? Where was all the beauty that had been so much a part of my life? It was gone, and a part of me with it. I let love slip through my fingers there so very long ago, and nothing can be done to regain that loss. And human society has suffered an irreplaceable loss, all under the guise of the misunderstood concept of progress. Progress. Progress at what cost? Progress at the cost of your freedom and your soul? To hell with your progress. Give it all back to the beavers. When I was 14, I spent the night with a student friend of mine once in Mud Creek Bottom. He lived with his grandparents in a little wooden shack right smack dab in the middle of the bottomland woods. He chopped wood for the cook stove. He gathered eggs and milked the cow. The granny made hot biscuits for breakfast, and they all read the Bible and prayed before bedtime. Unexpectedly, I came upon the stark remains of the little house, disintegrating with age, yet still defiant in its presence. Now, I will end my story for this time with a question. What, if anything, is to be learned from this hike through the muddy bottom? Well, some would say nothing. I disagree. First, if you have an opportunity to experience first love in all its purity and innocence, be as sure as you can that the feelings are mutual and that your partner is worthy of your trust and devotion. Then hold on to it for all you're worth. Let nothing or no one stand in your way. Sure, it's risky business. I know that. Lots of things can go wrong a long way. But it's worth the risk. Find someone to love and build your life around him or her. Love and trust is the glue that holds a free society together. Strong families make a strong nation. Secondly, during my long and quiet walk, I had time to make lots of comparisons between the 50s when I frequented the bridge and the present. Sure, the technology was crude. Man hadn't walked on the moon. We hadn't landed probes on Mars. Cell phones didn't exist. And people were still burdened down with the superstition about things like good and evil and heaven and hell. But we still had an incredible measure of freedom, guaranteed under the Constitution. Our America had not yet become a police state. The pill hadn't been invented, and abortion was still a dirty word. Ours was the greatest industrial nation on earth, with the highest standard of living, and we still had prayer in the schools. My friends, my sincere belief is that in order for our nation to have even a fighting chance to return to the greatness that once was ours, we must return to a code of belief and behavior which recognizes a power above and beyond our own. We must regain the fierce independence which has made us free. And freedom can be ours again. Well, once again, our time is up. So until next time, this is Bobby D. Moore saying, goodbye, friends. Does God exist? This has to be one of the most perplexing and important questions ever asked by man. It is a question which I asked myself and others for quite a number of years. I was unable to find an answer which satisfied my mind until a series of very, very unusual events took place in my life which answered the question beyond all reasonable doubt for me. I was so overwhelmed by the revelation which had become mine that I produced an hour-long recording describing in minute detail exactly what had taken place. Since that time, thousands of copies of the hour-long CD, Does God Exist?, have been distributed throughout the world. And now this is your opportunity to obtain your own free copy simply by requesting it. It's a story unlike anything you have ever heard. In order to get your free copy, just send an email to bobbymoorespeaks@gmail.com and say, send me the CD, and tell us where to send it. We'll send it to you as quickly as possible and as long as supplies permit. Our email address again is bobbymoorespeaks@gmail.com. That's bobbymoorespeaks@gmail.com.